Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin met in Geneva Wednesday for a 3-hour summit. The two leaders of the world's largest nuclear powers agreed to set up working groups to deal with nuclear arms control as well as cyber attacks. They also agreed to send ambassadors back to their posts in the United States and Russia. Biden said after the brief summit that both parties had agreed not to renew the tensions of the Cold War.
It's clearly not in anybody's interest, your country's or mine, for us to be in a situation where we're in a new Cold War. And I truly believe he thinks that.
After headlines, we'll have analysis of the Biden-Putin summit with Anatol Lieven, senior fellow for Russia and Europe at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. The German drug maker Curvacs says its COVID-19 vaccine showed an efficacy of just 47% in a large clinical trial. The disappointing result is just below the 50% threshold set by the World Health Organization and far below the roughly 95% effectiveness shown by other mRNA vaccines produced by Pfizer and Moderna. In the United States, Arizona Republican Governor Doug Ducey issued an executive order this week barring public universities and community colleges from requiring students to show proof of vaccination to attend class. Governor Ducey's order came just days after the University of California system said COVID-19 vaccines will be mandatory for students, faculty, and staff beginning this fall. A new report warns the Earth is trapping about twice as much heat as it did just 16 years ago, largely due to the buildup of greenhouse gases in its atmosphere. The study by NASA and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, finds human activity is at least partly to blame for the increase in Earth's energy imbalance. Meanwhile, record heat continues to bake the western United States, with Salt Lake City this week tying its all-time record high of 107 degrees Fahrenheit. The temperature in Death Valley, California, Wednesday reached 129 degrees Fahrenheit, or 54 degrees Celsius, just a few degrees shy of the highest temperature ever recorded on Earth. The House of Representatives has passed a bill enshrining Juneteenth as a federal holiday commemorating the end of slavery. The celebration marks June 19th, the day in 1865 that enslaved people in Galveston, Texas, learned of the Emancipation Proclamation signed by Abraham Lincoln more than 2 years prior, and that the Civil War had ended. Texas Democratic Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who's African-American, called the roll.
On this vote, the yeas are 415 and the nays are 14. The bill is passed.
Since the Senate passed the bill this week, the bill now heads to President Biden for his signature. Several members of the Congressional Black Caucus spoke in favor of the federal Juneteenth holiday, including New Jersey Democrat Bonnie Watson-Coleman.
Juneteenth is a day for me of commemoration, not of celebration. Because it reminds us of something that was delayed in happening. It also reminds me of what we don't have today, and that is full access to justice, freedom, and equality. All of these are often in short supply as it relates to the Black community, and it is still delayed.
The Justice Department has overturned Trump-era rules that prevented survivors of domestic violence and families targeted by violent gangs from receiving asylum in the United States. Immigration rights group Al Otro Lado, or the other side, said, quote, "This is going to make the difference between life or death for so many people fleeing danger." The Biden administration's restored protections for trans students against discrimination on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation. The move reverses the Trump administration's exclusion of trans students from protections under Title IX, a 1972 federal law barring discrimination on the basis of sex. In a victory for reproductive rights, a federal court ruled Wednesday North Carolina's ban on abortions after 20 weeks is unconstitutional and creates a credible threat of prosecution for providers. A lawyer with the Center for Reproductive Rights who argued the case celebrated the ruling, saying, quote, "Forcing someone to continue a pregnancy against their will is a violation of their basic humanity, their rights, and their freedom," they said. In related news, in Missouri, a federal court last week blocked a ban on abortions after 8 weeks of pregnancy. In Mexico, authorities have identified remains belonging to one of the 43 disappeared and likely massacred students from a teacher's college in Ayotzinapa, Guerrero. The student has been named as Josevani Guerrero. He is just the third person in the group to have been found and identified. The 2014 disappearance led to the intense public outrage and protests. Families of the disappeared students have long maintained the military was involved in the mass abduction. In Peru, socialist presidential candidate Pedro Castillo has declared victory after final count showed him with a 44,000-vote lead over right-wing politician Keiko Fujimori, the daughter of Peru's imprisoned former dictator. Fujimori has claimed voter fraud without evidence and has promised to challenge certification of Castillo's win. On Tuesday, Castillo tweeted an image of himself with his arms raised in victory over the words "president" and his campaign slogan, "No more poor in a rich country." Castillo has promised to raise taxes on Peru's lucrative copper mining industry and to fund health care and education initiatives and to reduce Peru's vast income inequality. Democratic Massachusetts Congressmember Jim McGovern is calling on President Biden to end deadly U.S. sanctions against Venezuela, suggesting they amount to collective punishment. McGovern, who is chair of the House Human Rights Commission, says sanctions aimed at forcing President Nicolas Maduro from power instead pushed millions of people into poverty and hunger while denying them health care and other basic services during the pandemic. This is Congressmember McGovern speaking to peace activists earlier this year.
It has resulted in needless death. It has resulted in people not getting the medical supplies that, quite frankly, can keep them alive. It has resulted in food shortages. It has resulted in a lot of suffering.
China's military sent 28 warplanes into airspace controlled by Taiwan Tuesday, a record number since it began flying sorties off the coast of Taiwan on a near-daily basis last year. In response, Taiwan scrambled jet fighters, activated missile defense systems, and issued warnings to the Chinese pilots. The tensions came a day after President Biden successfully pushed NATO leaders to declare China to be a security risk for the first time. China's repeatedly warned the U.S. against intervening in Taiwan, which China claims as its sovereign territory. China's launched 3 astronauts on a 3-month mission to its new space station in low Earth orbit. China built its own station after the U.S. banned Chinese astronauts, known as taikonauts, from the International Space Station. It's China's first crewed mission since 2016 and follows 2 other recent successes, a sample return mission from the moon and the deployment of a rover on Mars. China is just the second nation after the United States to operate a rover on the Red Planet. Saudi Arabia's beheaded a man accused of taking part in anti-government riots when he was a teenager. Tuesday's execution of 26-year-old Mustafa Hasham al-Darwish came despite international outcry. He was imprisoned in 2015 for allegedly participating in a protest of minority Shia Muslim youth demanding jobs and an end to discrimination at the height of the Arab Spring in 2011 and 2012. Al-Darwish was just 17 or 18 years old at the time of the uprising. Human rights groups say Saudi Arabia has carried out at least 26 executions this year. A warning to our audience, this headline contains graphic descriptions of police violence. In Hawaii, 3 Honolulu police officers are facing murder charges after the fatal shooting of a teenage boy in April. Jeffrey Tom, the officer who shot the boy, initially claimed 16-year-old I Remember Psychap, who was driving at the time of the killing, rammed his car into him. But prosecutors say body cam footage does not match the officer's account. In another case of police violence from Honolulu, the family and lawyers of a black South African man are demanding answers and justice for Lindani Mayeni, who was shot dead by police in April. Surveillance video from a doorbell shows Mayeni removed his shoes and entered a house immediately after a couple, but shortly thereafter exited and apologized multiple times. The woman who entered the home ahead of Mayeni called 911 to report a burglary, but when police arrived on the scene, they did not announce themselves before confronting and eventually shooting Mayeni dead. His lawyers say he confused the home with a neighboring house, which acts as a place of worship and is open to the public. Mayeni's wife has filed a wrongful death lawsuit accusing the police of racial discrimination. Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott has signed a bill allowing people to carry guns without a permit or training if they're not prohibited by state or federal law from possessing a firearm. Abbott signed the bill privately Wednesday and will hold a ceremonial signing this morning at the Alamo in San Antonio. Texas joins 20 other states with similar laws. Meanwhile, in California, San Jose's city council voted unanimously Tuesday to require gun shops to record firearm purchases. The ordinance follows last month's mass shooting in a San Jose rail yard when a gunman with a history of sexual assault killed 9 people before turning the gun on himself. Back in New York, Jack Weinstein, a Brooklyn federal judge who sat on the bench for over half a century and oversaw landmark class action lawsuits, died here at the age of 99. In 1984, he approved a $180 million settlement for Vietnam War veterans who were exposed to Agent Orange. He also ruled on key cases against gun manufacturers and big tobacco. In Puerto Rico, another power failure left hundreds of thousands of homes in the dark across the island late Wednesday. This is the second major outage following the recent takeover of the electric grid by the U.S. and Canadian company Luma Energy. Labor unions and others have been protesting against the privatization of Puerto Rico's energy network. And in Greece, the conservative-led parliament has passed a bill that allows employees to work more hours in a day in exchange for time off. The bill was condemned by opposition lawmakers and labor unions, which organized strikes and demonstrations in response. This is a protester speaking from Athens Wednesday.
Workers are determined not to allow our rights to be destroyed, not to go back to previous centuries. We will protect the 8-hour workday, which was won with blood, and we will not allow anyone to profit on our backs.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. When we come back, the Biden-Putin summit. It lasted 3 hours. What happened? Stay with us.